Good morning or afternoon, I guess, depending on where you are located. And welcome to our webinar this afternoon of Securing Your Office 365 Accounts in the Modern Enterprise. Um, Today, I'm Mike Austin. I'm the founder and CEO of Metrics Data 360. I'm one of the authorities on Microsoft licensing. I've, negotiated a lot of Microsoft contracts and really passionate about helping clients ensure that they buy what they need. And I'm really excited today to be presenting with our partner from Solilan, Rija. Rija is the vice president of Microsoft Partner Solutions at Solilan. He's been in the IT world for over 22 years. And so today we're going to talk a little bit about, how to secure Microsoft O365 and some of their security products. But before we start with that, I'm actually going to dive in and talk a little bit about how to procure um, Microsoft 365, because I think that's one of the most important things. And it really starts, we surveyed about 100 or so, IT and IT procurement professionals. And, basically we heard the following, and this kind of falls into three big buckets here, is that when it comes to actually, buying Microsoft licenses, or actually this one was around cloud, but you can extrapolate this to Microsoft as well, is it fell into three big categories. One is it's the cost. The costs are getting out of control. I actually had a conversation with one of my clients yesterday who is looking to do a large Microsoft purchase. And the CFO was at a CFO event, and he's not sure whether he actually wants to sign off on it because all the CFOs that were at that event said they bought into Microsoft Cloud and they're not getting any return. It's actually more expensive. And so, we are hearing that costs are going up. You see these price increases. The second thing, biggest bucket of areas around licensing. It's confusing. People don't understand how all the bundles work. And then the third area is really around data and the lack of data. And that data comes into two areas, both of them sort of what we're going to talk about today. One is, how do I use data to make intelligent purchasing decisions? And the other piece of it is, how do I use data to actually secure my environment more effectively? And so, what we're going to cover is, how to collect data, how to purchase only what you need, how to negotiate with Microsoft, and then how to, and then we're going to talk a little bit about the security piece and how you use this data to do that. And so I'm going to start and say, like, when it comes to using data to beat Microsoft at their own game, how do we know it works? A lot of people are like, if I go out and do the things that you're about to talk about, Mike, how do I know this is going to work? And there's a few key things here. One is, a lot of times people say, I really don't know what I'm buying. I don't understand the bundles. I don't understand if we're using what we're using. Are we using what we're paying for? What's, is it the right license type? All of this sort of stuff. And when people work with us, they understand what they're using. They understand the decisions they're making. They understand the trade-offs, and they have a massive reduction in the amount of time that it takes to put these things together. And so one of the things when it comes to data that I tell people all the time, and this is one of the key things about even when you're looking at, the security piece that we're going to talk about, is you really have to understand what you're using. So a lot of times I'm going to talk about the strategy that Microsoft uses when it comes to negotiating, but most organizations go out and they just sort of buy more of what they had or increase. So like if I'm on Office 365 E3, I'm talking about moving to E5, and they sort of have an idea of their roadmap, but they really don't. And so one of the first pieces of information that we talk about is actually going out and understanding your Microsoft roadmap. And when we work with clients, we have over 15 actual surveys that we do with our clients to understand that roadmap. And you can kind of see a couple of them here on the screen. But like if you look at like the Microsoft security product, what are we looking at? What do we currently have in our environment? What third parties do we have? When do those expire? What's our value that we're paying for those on an annual basis, so that we can look at, if we were to buy the Microsoft security products, is there even value in it, or are we just going to be double paying? And it doesn't matter if Microsoft discounts the cost completely out, if we've still got third-party costs that we can't get rid of. And so you want to pull all that together to get a view of where you're at. And so how does this actually come together? I want to kind of use this one client that we had as an example. They were buying O365 E3s across the board for all of their users, and they really didn't have much data other than they kind of bought these. They thought that everybody was using them. And so when we went in and we analyzed their usage data and we did the surveys, what we actually found out is they had about 400 users in their environment that weren't using Office 365 at all. And they had no clue. And actually, they didn't believe us until we showed them the data. And when because we had access to their teams and we understood from the surveys sort of what was going on, we found out where they had 400. This was an oil and gas company. They had 400 field techs that were just being dispatched. So their entire job, they had an application on a tablet. They were dispatched to go out to some location, do some welding, input what they did, and then get dispatched to the next position. And so when we showed them they weren't using O365 at all, it was a shock to them. They didn't believe us. But when we looked at it and we saw this, and then we went back and supplemented some of the stuff we did with a conversation around the business owner of that field service tech, they found out, yeah, they don't use any of this stuff. So even though they thought they were using it, they really weren't. And so that's just one area where, using data can really kind of dive in and help you, right? Also, when you understand what's going on, you can actually correlate this stuff to licensing. So this is a good example of, a client that was on premise with Teams or Skype, I guess, and, a little bit of team stuff on in the cloud. And Microsoft was just saying, like, go buy a bunch of licenses for O365 E5s and these Teams Plus licenses and things like that. And they really didn't know what their requirements were until we pulled this together for them. Because what this screenshot is out of our survey report, we're able to tell them, like, look, these are all your users. So I'm not going to go into all the details of how this works from a licensing perspective, but we can tell them, based on what we see here, here's exactly the licenses you need. It's not E5 for all your users. It's E5 for this subset of your users, this and this for this subset of your users, and this for this subset of your users. So instead of being $2 million, you actually only need $1.5 million worth of licenses to support this, or whatever it worked out with to be. And they were able to do that based on data, right? And so kind of one of the things that people will say is, like, how do I purchase only what I need to, right? And because they'll tell me all the time, I'm not an expert on licensing and I'm not a professional negotiator. At least that's what IT people will tell me. And I like to use this story. I was actually on a plane one time, and I was flying home, and we were pretty much on the ground. Like, we were coming in, and we were, probably about 10 seconds to landing. And the pilot pulled straight up, and I think we must have almost gone up at a 90-degree angle. And he came on, a minute or two later, once we got up in the air, and he's like, sorry, folks, we came in a little bit close to another plane, so I pulled up for safety. And didn't think much of it until I got home and saw the pilot on an interview on the news. And we were literally something like 5 seconds from a midair collision. And the thing that stood out for me for that is the reporter asked the pilot, were you concerned at all? Were you scared? And the pilot's response was, no, I had all the data that I needed. The lights were blinking. We'd practiced this in the simulators. I knew exactly what to do in this situation because all the data was in front of me and I didn't have to think. I just reacted and did what needed to be done. And in some ways, it's very similar to how you should be working with Microsoft, because a lot of the times people actually don't have the data and then they're reacting. And if you react wrong, you have consequences, which in this case could have been a midair collision, right? And so when you make the wrong decisions because you're reacting to bad data and things like that, you're going to buy contracts and things like that you shouldn't be. And so I like to use case studies. And at a high level, here's another one that we had where we had a organization. They were a manufacturer, 2,500 users. This was right in the heat of COVID. They were having supply chain issues. Everybody knows they couldn't get chips like everybody else. Cash flow was being hurt, and they needed to find cost savings. And they suspected they were over licensed, but they didn't know where. And so one of the things that we did is we went in, and we're going to talk about our tooling, and I'm going to show you that here in a couple of seconds, around what they were doing. And so this is an example of where they thought they were using E5 for everybody. We were able to show them that they weren't. We reduced a bunch of their F3 licenses. So they were buying F3 licenses for contractors and things like that weren't even using technology, weren't actually even in their Active Directory. And through that survey process, we actually identified $700,000 in vendor duplication, where they had Microsoft technologies that they were paying for third party to do the same thing. And so again, it's just an example of how using data can give you great results, right? But you might think, okay, I'm not a business analyst, I'm not technical. we hear things like, I don't have the ability to access systems. I don't have all the time to do the work. Will I get any better results? And so the reality is, if you get the right data, you don't need to be a licensed expert or even negotiate. You don't even need to understand the security products or how all the bundling works. It's going to be done for you. And so I like to use this chart to sort of talk this through. And I'm going to make this stuff from the high level and get this real before I hand off to Rija here in a second, right? But this here, it's at m365maps.com. It's a Microsoft person, Aaron Dinich, that keeps this up to date. One of the first questions I get all the time, quite honestly, is what's the difference between O365 and M365? And this chart actually illustrates that. So Office 365, this is for E3. On the site, you can get charts for E5, for the F SKUs, all of that, but this is just the E3 one. What you see here is in the, I guess it's kind of red color on the right, this is Office 365 E3. And so one of the things that people get mistaken with is they think Office 365 is a product or that M365 is a product. It's not. It's a marketing bundle. The products are the products and services that are in this bundle that's called Office 365 E3 that are all these little red boxes. Now, some of these little red boxes you can buy as a product, and others are services that get included with products, okay? So for instance, alert policies and audit logging is not something that you buy. That's just a service that comes when you buy some of these O365 products. Things like Exchange Online and the Microsoft Business Apps or the Office product or SharePoint Online, et cetera, those are actual products. Okay, but if you look at this O365 E3 bundle, it's made up of approximately 35 different products or services, okay? And then in the middle is what Microsoft calls the Enterprise Mobility Suite, or the acronym is EMS. And EMS is, again, a bundle of products. So in the dotted blue line here, you have Azure Active Directory Premium. So if I wanted to just buy MFA from Microsoft, I can't. It's included in this Azure AD product, right? And then the EMS also includes products like Intune. It includes the rights to access Windows servers on premise. It includes the rights to manage the product, those desktops and on premise with the System Center product and some other things. And then on the far right, we have Windows. I guess I should probably get the newer version of this because it's now Windows 11, but the Windows Desktop OS, right? And so when I put all three of those in a bundle, the OE3, the Office 365 3E3, the EMS E3, and the Windows 11 license, that's an M365. So it just becomes a bigger bundle. Okay, now where does this really start to come together? This is where it comes together. I'm actually going to flop out of this for a second. Oops. And I'm going to go into our tool where the screenshot is to show you how this actually works. So this is our tool that we use. It's called Slim 360. It would connect into your O365 tenant with read-only access, and then we can start doing all kinds of great data analytics on it. And I clicked on the wrong one here, but I want to click on this report. And I just want to show you how this works, because this is where the power of starting to collect data comes together. And I'm actually going to start to tie some of this together with security. So on the left, I know this screen looks like a little bit of an eye chart. On the left over here are the products or the SKUs that this tenant has assigned to it. So we can see our Microsoft 365 E3 here. On the right are the products and services. So if I flip back to my slide deck for a second, on the left was this thing, everything on this screen, that's the M365 E3. On the right are all the individual services that make that up, okay? So I'm going to back over into Slim here. And so when I click on E3, you'll notice here, this is 138 plans. That's everything that's in here. When I click on the E3, you're going to see 43 plans. So these are the 43 plans that make up the Office 365 E3. Okay, so a couple of things to note here. You'll see here, they own 200 licenses. This is a partner account of ours, so we get 200 free, so there's 200 in here. But the key thing is you'll see 83 assigned, okay? And so normally we would see something like 100 owned, 83 assigned. Microsoft would look at that as 83% consumed. In this case, they're considering it 41% consumed, 83 divided by 200. And that's how they look at your deployment. But over here on the right, we can actually see that we're only using 20.4% of the functionality. So of all of those 43 services and plans, we're only using 20% of them. So when Microsoft says things like we have an 11% price increase on the M365 because we included all these other new products, we can go and say we're not actually using them with data. Okay. And I have the ability to actually dive into this and go and see which users are using this. Now, right now, because I'm in a demo account, this is anonymized. In a customer account, you would see your user here. But the thing here is like what I want to show is I can start to see things like, for instance, this user here has used this product or service that I drilled into. I think I went into Azure AD. So they've gone in, they've used it, but they haven't used it in 30 days. The last time they used it was in 38 days actually. This user here has had it assigned and never used it. This user's used it in the past, but hasn't used it in over 180 days. Why is that? Right? So when I'm starting to look at things, it's like, why is it that I have users that aren't using things and things like that? I can dive in and figure it out. So the reality is this person that hasn't used it in over 415 days was probably somebody that was given an account that never used it, or it's a service account that's never been used. There's all kinds of different reasons, and we can dive in and figure that out, right? But the key thing to note is I can go in and start to look at these things. Now, again, this is just a small demo account, but what I wanted to show you is when you start talking about security, Microsoft has this thing called the E5 Security Suite, right? And that's made up of Azure Active Directory Plan 2. It's made up of Microsoft Defender. It's made up of Office Safe Docs and all these different products and services. And I can go in and do the same thing here. I can see if my users are actually using these products, right? So if it's green, I can tell whether a user's using it. If it's yellow, I can't. Now, the reason for usually why I can't tell if a user's using it is that it's turned on at a tenant level, right? So what does that mean? That means that what that functionality is not set to the user, it is set to the tenant. And so when that gets turned on, all users in the tenant actually have access to that product. And there's no way to tell whether an individual user is using it because the tenant itself is protected. And that causes some licensing challenges because if I turn some of those features on, are users using it, getting advantage of it if they don't have the licenses that include in it? So there's some analysis that needs to be done. But again, when we're buying these things, I can go in and I can take a look and see if all these things are being used or not, right? And you'll also see that I can see whether they're being purchased through the M365 or through the E5, right? And you can tell here, just if I look at this second one here, this is Azure Active Directory Plan 2. So this user has access to that through an E5. This user here only has access to that through the E5 security. So I can actually start to differentiate where people are using it. So if you think about applications like Power Apps that I get in an E5, and then I can buy standalone, I can see if my E5 users are actually using it. I can see if my standalone people are using it, so I can see where it's bought to figure out what I need to be doing from a licensing perspective. Okay, so I just wanted to come into the system and kind of show you how you start to use this data, because what this allows us to do are things like, if I wanted to, I could go and look and see the F SKU, which is for frontline workers. It's a limited SKU. There's some restrictions on it, have to be kiosk users and things like that. A lot of times people are like, can we actually use the F SKUs? I'm buying E SKUs. An E SKU at E3 at $20 a month versus an F at $7 or $8 a month can have a substantial difference if I can use those. I can actually go in and see whether I have users that are eligible for the F SKU at a click of a button in here and do all kinds of analysis, right? So the key point that I want to make is just the more data that you get when it comes to these things, the more easier it is to make decisions. And so when it comes to beating Microsoft and negotiating and figuring out what I need to buy, the data becomes the key. And, I always tell a story about when I was at Microsoft. I actually won President's Club and we had a trip to Hawaii. And one day they actually had this, they had a series of events that you could go and do. And my wife and I were looking at them and none of them really interested us all that much. So we thought, oh, let's go out on, they had a deep sea fishing expedition. So we thought, oh, well, let's go out and do the deep sea fishing. At least we'll be out on the water for the day. And so we signed up for that. And as soon as we signed up, my stomach dropped because I was like, what the heck was I thinking? I get seasick. And so true to form, it was in October. It was at the end of season. We were out for about an hour. There was no fish biting. And I got seasick. And I'm literally in the cabin lying down seasick when I hear the captain's mate yell, fish on. And it's a big one. And I kind of jumped up and I saw it jump and it kind of went down. And he basically said there were 4 couples. He said it's going to take all 4 of the guys on this boat probably about 5 hours to pull this thing in because it's the biggest one that we've ever seen. And, long story short, I caught a 500-pound blue marlin and I pulled it in 45 minutes by myself. Now I say by myself, but it really wasn't by myself, right? Because if you think about it, the captain was using a fish finder to go and figure out where this fish was. And, so he took us out in the ocean and figured out where it was. The skip was there telling me what to do, right? Like, so, it's not as simple as just reeling in. The seat that I'm in there is kind of on an angle, and you sort of squat to release tension on the line, and you reel and you stand up and bring in tension, and there's times to do that. So the skip's like squat, reel, and the captain was like backing the boat up to release tension or pulling it forward to tire the fish down. My wife was there pouring water on my head because it was hot. The rest of the couples on the boat were cheering me on, and so it was really a team effort. So when you think about negotiating with Microsoft, especially if you get that sick feeling in your stomach, like, and you got to go beat this 500-pound monster that is Microsoft, you can't do it alone. It's a team, right? Like, you need somebody that knows where the data is. How do I go find that data? What data do I need? Even when I'm looking at security, what data do I need? What product do I need? How do I go find that stuff? I need somebody that knows the ins and outs of how to take that data and actually reel the fish in, right? So how do I use that data to figure out, is it an E3? Do I need E3 secure or E5 security for everybody? Should I buy an E5? Should I just buy a Defender Plan 2, right? Like, I have no clue on this stuff. You need a cheering on, like a cast of crew to help, right? Legal, finance, procurement. It's not an individual thing to do this, right? So when you're beating Microsoft, you need a team. And the way most organizations negotiate these deals with Microsoft, whether it's an EA, whether it's CSP or whatnot, is they run some SAM tools, some software asset, what I call traditional software asset management tools. So they might run some typical reports out of the O365 portal. They might do a little bit of an inventory thing, and then they come up with some idea, and they're like, okay, this is what we do. And then they jump right off of that, and then they go and negotiate. To do this right takes 6 to 12 months. Right? Because you need to run those tools, really optimize them. You need to do an analysis, a detailed analysis of the licensing that goes with that. You need a data-driven decision point to negotiate this stuff. And then you got to go after your goal of maximizing your value and your ROI. And I'm going to take about 2 more seconds here, and then I'm going to hand it over to Rija to start talking about some security stuff. But if you look at it, when we work with clients, we spend 60% of our time not even talking to Microsoft. We spend 15%. So you think about it, a lot of clients on here are big clients, that have multi-million-dollar EAs. And so I was just talking to one yesterday. They got it's a 21 million 3-year Microsoft deal that they're looking at negotiating. And I was like, okay, if you were to build a $21 million restaurant, what would you do? They're like, well, we would have project managers and, experts in this and that. I'm like, yeah, you're going to run a $21 million EA renewal with a single procurement person doing it, and you think you're going to get the best deal. And they're like, yeah, that doesn't make any sense, right? So that whole setup stage of understanding what are the goals, what are the milestones, what are the project, how are we measuring what we need to do becomes so important. And then the 50% in the middle, that deal design, is all the stuff I was just sort of at a high level talking about. How do we go get that data? Not just for O365, but for Azure, for our on-premise, for our unified support. How do I understand what we're trying to do? What third parties are we using? What third parties are we considering displacing? All of that sort of stuff. And then once I get to that, I get into the tactical negotiation. That's the strategy of negotiation stuff, the moves and the gives and the takeaways at the table, right? Now, if I had a line in here, Microsoft starts right at that top, right? So again, that client I was talking to yesterday, I'm like, okay, Microsoft's going to come in, you're on E3, they're going to give you a proposal, you're at 21 million right now, you need to decrease your spend on that. Microsoft's going to tell you E3 pricing's gone up 11, so now you're looking at something like 23 million, not even 21 as your baseline. And what Microsoft's going to do is they're going to give you an E5 proposal that starts at something like 30, 31 million. They're going to try and negotiate that down to 25 million. And then you're going to be like, well, I got the best deal I could. And you're spending 4 million more than you were. And, that's where you kind of get, because they start there. Whereas a data-driven approach, you don't allow them to do that, because we go in and go, we don't even need 21 million, we need 16 million. And by the way, here's our roadmap of everything that we need. So don't even try and sell us E5, because we got 3 years left on all these security products. We could just use this one little piece, and that's it, right? And so it gives you the thing to do that. And I'm going to leave it at this. One of the things is, when you talk to Microsoft, when you talk to any software publisher, they talk about value all the time. And they talk about value from the definition of value as to estimate the monetary worth of something. right? And so you'll hear them say things like, oh, the EA is valued at $1.2 million per year, but because it's in an EA, it's only $1 million. So we're giving you $200,000 of value, right? I look at value from the perspective of a gentleman by the name of Alex Hormozi, who talks about value being an equation of your dream outcome times the likelihood of that happening divided by the time delay to get that done, multiply the efforts and sacrifice to get there, right? And so how does that look? So if you look at Microsoft, for instance, Microsoft's dream outcome is that you purchase what Microsoft wants you to purchase. E5, across the board, you move to all their security products. It might be the right thing, right? What's the likelihood of that happening? It's probably pretty high because you really don't have much choice, right? The time delay, not much. If I'm in O365 and there's a renewal, it's like it's got to happen on this date, or they start threatening all kinds of crazy stuff like charging list price plus 20% or whatnot. The efforts and sacrifice by Microsoft, very little. I mean, you talk to some of the largest companies in the world, Microsoft doesn't even spend time helping them understand why they would go to third parties, to their security products until the very last minute. Like they're like, hey, we're 6 weeks away from the EA. Let's have a roadmap discussion on security products, right? And what's the value to Microsoft? It's massive. You just signed a new 3-year deal at 20 to 40% more than you were paying on the last contract, and you bought software you'll never use. They love that, right? Because then they'll spend the next 3 years trying to get you to use that software that you bought that you'll never use. You put this in your perspective, what do you want? I want to buy only what I need. And a lot of the times I'm hearing now, especially with what's going on in the economy, not only do I only want to buy what I need to reduce my cost 10 to 20%, right? The likelihood of that happening for you is pretty low, right? Because you have no leverage over Microsoft, especially if you approach it from we're going to get an E5 proposal from them and try and push down, right? If we don't understand our technical roadmap around the security products and where we're going and when it makes sense to buy and how we get value out of that, and then how do we go and discuss that with Microsoft, even if we want to adopt it, you can't do that, right? What's the efforts and sacrifices? A lot for you. I hear so many people spend so much time with Microsoft in these meetings where they go round and round in circles and they get nowhere. And then the value to you is less, right? It's less than your last agreement because you face price increases and you bought more stuff yet again that you don't need. Right. And so that's not value. And so you really have to figure out how to play this equation with in order to buy what you want. Right. And so I'm going to turn it over to Region now. So I'm going to leave it at that. So if I kind of just summarize, the key is to use data to figure out what you need. Microsoft, and a lot of people are looking to save money. The Microsoft security products are an area that a lot of people are looking to save money. They're looking to consolidate third-party cost out. But you have to go through this process of understanding your current footprint, how much you own, when you can make these changes, all that sort of stuff. And so I'm going to turn it over to Region now to talk about, the risks of dark data and all that fun stuff. So Region, over to you, and I'll just let me know when I'll flip slides as appropriate here.
Very much. Can you hear me okay, Mike? You're good?
I can, yes.
Okay, wonderful. Well, great insight as always, Mike. Again, it's a real pleasure for me to be here. I'm going to finish the segment with really complementing what Mike has been talking about the importance for you as you are thinking about renegotiating with Microsoft is really to also address another behemoth in the room, which really is security. Because it's one thing to save money, and we all need to save money because of this recession that is looming and that is already here. And I will talk more about that, about how typically Microsoft is finally coming to its senses and slowly understanding that they need to help customers do more with less. But there's another piece of data that is really, really going to be important on top of, equipping yourself with negotiating with Microsoft is ensuring that and that you secure a business. Security is a real risk. I'm going to talk about today, finishing this segment, about why it's really important that you know everything about your data within your organization. Why you should protect and manage your data as a business, specifically customer data. What are the risks for you if you if you are not compliant? And specifically, how can the people like the application Slim 360 that was shown to you by Mike can help you with our help as security experts, can help you really discover the hidden of dark, what we call dark data. Okay, so if you could just move on, Mike, the slide here. As you probably know, and you are seeing this every single day, the amount of data that is coming through because of our modern lives is just exploding. Okay, within the enterprise, we used to just deal with emails and and documents that we just exchange to one another. Unfortunately, as you have all seen, our lives are increasingly becoming digital. We do have now data coming from everywhere. It's coming from text messaging, from images, from the Internet of Things, from all the different areas, and the boundaries between organizations is becoming less clear. We have data coming from everywhere. So it's becoming really critical to make sure that you meet what we call internal, but also external compliance requirement, specifically if you are into a specific, into some kind of business that deals with some really critical information. Okay, another information, another change that also has been pushed based on what Mike talked about is with COVID, for instance, is now that people are working from home, you and I are working with data that is transiting from our multiple locations, from the office, from the home office, from vendors, servers, and et cetera, et cetera. So data is really becoming critical to manage and to understand where it is. Okay. Another thing that is also coming up is the world is changing. The regulations around managing data is becoming more complex because of the fact that data is exploding on a daily basis. So if you could just move on to the next slide here, you're going to see that because of that explosion of data coming all across, nations and countries are slowly trying to really help, but I would say force organizations to have the framework that allows them to manage that data. Because more and more, as we are going to be doing more business with each other, collecting customer data is going to be part of most businesses. And what most people have seen and what we see every single day, and what Microsoft is seeing as well, is there is a general lack of rigor when it comes to maintaining and protecting personal data. Hence, the increasing regulation that is coming up, not only in Europe with GDPR, which most of you have probably heard for the past few years, but coming also across multiple countries with all of these different regulations and rules coming in. But this is not just the only reason. The other reasons why these are also becoming prevalent is because COVID has made also a lot of changes. Now we're working with customer data, with your organization data. We're dealing with that data working from home. So what we call bring your own device, BYOD, is also pushing for more regulation. The adoption of cloud as a new architecture, which now has been obviously prevalent all across the world, is also pushing towards more regulations. Okay, so the whole idea, the whole messaging here is it's going to be increasingly difficult and regulated to manage data. Hence, an obligation for you as a business to really be ready and know where that dark data is coming within your organization. Okay, Mike, next slide, please. So the whole key message here really is what we do to help organizations is really we sit down and we help them putting together a strategy to protect and managing that data. A lot of that data is dark, meaning that we have no idea what kind of data it is. A lot of that data potentially could become what we call a business critical and sensitive data. But you need to know, you need to know where it is, what's being done with it, how does it transit from one location to another. do you actually have control over that data as it moves from your suppliers to you within and outside of your organizations? And how are you going to be managing, labeling, and controlling that data and protecting that data, specifically if it's critical data? So that's typically where we're helping customers discover through the tools that Mike just mentioned, discover and manage that data. The fact of the matter is, and please, Mike, just move to the next slide. The fact of the matter is, it's not going to be a walk in the park, because most people, most organizations just don't have the tools to allow them to find out about their data. Some numbers here: about 88% of businesses have no longer have confidence to detect and prevent loss of sensitive data. They have no tools. They don't know, within all these tools that Mike has been talking about, they have no idea what are the tools used typically to detect and prevent the loss or the hackers to steal that data. That's obviously a huge issue that we're helping organizations with. The other is that we talk about dark data. Dark data meaning it's not structured data. It's data that we actually don't know what it's like. How are you going to be able to understand and label, classify data if you don't even know where it is? And it's assessed that about today, from an IBM survey that came up, there's about 80% of your data today that is completely classified as dark, meaning that we don't know what kind of data it is. We don't know if it's protected correctly. We don't even know how it's governed. So huge amount of work ahead of us in terms of helping customers how to move forward and really try to put some sense around it. So, Mike, if you could just move on to the next slide. What happens if you're not compliant in managing and protecting your data? I mean, there's basically three areas where three major risks that people are facing with. Most people think it's the fines. Yes, there is obviously a monetary risk that is going to be costly. If you want to have a quick overview of the type of fines that some businesses have faced over time, you can just Google a name called GDPR fine tracker. And that's actually going to send you to some really interesting stats about the type of fines that that some companies were hit because they were not compliant with GDPR. GDPR is mostly based out of Europe, but I can assure you that very similar frameworks are actually coming our way as well. The number one factor that people are really scared about is the loss of trust. If your customers don't know what, or if they read something about some hackers has been able to actually steal your data, you're done. You're done, because it's going to be very hard to win trust with your business if you don't know how to be compliant with your customers' data. Loss of trust is going to be the number one problem. Obviously, the reputational damage is also going to be a risk. As you've probably seen, the increasing amount of dollars that are used by companies to make sure that when a breach of trust has been done due to a cybersecurity event, it really does make some damages, not only monetary speaking, but also from a reputational damage perspective. If we could just move to the next slide, please, as we finish this talk here. So typically, the type of workshop that we're going to be helping you with is leveraging SLIM 360. The tool that has been shown is we're going just to use the data. We're going to use the data that you have, and we're going to figure out what are the different tools in place that you have to understand the type of data that you have. What are the type of tools that you have in place to govern that data? How do you safeguard that data? And then after that, once we have a good sense of how your security posture is we're going to guide you on how we could improve your compliance posture. That's typically how we're going to be helping you. Where to start? If you could just move to the next slide, please. So where do we start? We start with a workshop. We sit down with Mike and his team that is going to be doing an overview of your licensing. But then we sit down with a security expert who's going to be giving you doing a security assessment and providing you an idea of how you're going to be structuring your security. Next slide, please. We're going to look at what are the different types of data that you currently have. What's the security risks that you have in place because of your security posture? We're going to assess your environment, and then we're going to provide you a report that allows you to make decisions from there. Based on that report, Mike and his team will be able to give you a real sense of what are the licenses that will be able to help you provide you the type of compliance that you will need, and not necessarily go all E5 like Microsoft would want you to do. That's the whole idea of the SLIM 365 workshop. Okay. One piece of information that I wanted to share as well is, I think with typically the awareness that people like Mike is actually giving to organization, Microsoft is slowly understanding that they really need to change the way they do business with companies. They really need to change this idea of typically always providing just E5s to everyone. More and more, Microsoft understands the importance of really making sure that they do have a posture around having E5 being replaced only with what customers really need. And I think Microsoft 365 now really, the idea is really to make sure that you only pay the license that you really need, and that's typically where Mike and his team can help you. Microsoft 365 has all of the different components to make sure that you have your security taken care of. Can I just go to the next slide, please? There's this new do more with less that really allows you to understand that with Microsoft, once you know what you're doing from a licensing perspective, you actually have everything you need to not only protect your business from a security perspective, but also to use all of the features that you really need. You just need to know the data that allows you to understand how to match the use of the software or the different services with what is it that you need for your organizations. And that is something that Microsoft is able to do, and we can help you with Mike really match that security requirements that you have, because you need to secure your workers, but at the same time only use the licenses that you need for your business. And that is something that is possible. And at the same time, making sure that you simplify the management, the IT management of your company. So there's really three things that you need. Next slide, please, Mike. When you wanna do more with less, you wanna eliminate anything that is redundant, specifically around licensing, and that is where Mike and his team really shine. You wanna make sure that you understand and you wanna have the right guidance to make sure that you only pay for the license that you need. And with Microsoft, as you've seen that mapping that Mike shows, you can really just take whatever you need and not necessarily go with the bundles. Sometimes the bundles will make sense, but some other times it will just make sense to take whatever you need for your solutions. The second piece really is also to simplify your IT. Most organizations who have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 IT vendors really find it too complex. Simplifying your IT management means automating systems as much as you can, but also means optimizing and taking the most value from the license that you already have. You don't need multiple security solutions. Just take one security solution from Microsoft or from any other vendors, but just make sure that you do not replicate the type of solutions that you have in place. So simplify your IT management. That is another way for you to reduce your cost. And then obviously, and we talked about this already, you also need to make sure that you protect your workers at the same time. By protecting your workers with all of the different security solutions in the Microsoft bundles or in the Microsoft mapping, you will be able to meet the requirements of not only paying only the license you need, simplifying your IT, but at the same time securing your business. Okay, so that I would stop with that. If you have any questions, we're now going to take questions. Mike, I don't know if you.
Rija, I'm just gonna show people how this sort of comes together real quick inside of SLIM, right? So we talked about this in terms of how to see what people are using, but sort of what we have a security assessment built into this. And what I wanted to show you, we also have risk and governance and stuff like that. There's a lot of depth of stuff that can go together. But what this does is it looks at your secure score from Microsoft, which is Microsoft looking at how secure they believe your tenant to be. But that's really a biased thing, and it's really Microsoft centric, because they will say that your secure score is low because they, like, if you're using MFA, like if you're not using Microsoft MFA and you're using Okta, for instance, they'll say you don't have MFA, right? So it's a biased, kind of biased look, but it is how Microsoft does funding. But the key thing is, like, what you want to be able to do is go in and do things like looking at, how are my conditional access policies working?
Right.
Are they working, right? So you can see here, this one's got 73,000 policies that failed, right? I can see that files have been shared externally. Should they be shared externally? Do we have policies on that? Those sorts of things. Is there a threat of, data linkage, right? So leakage. So you can see here, like 98% of the files in this organization have been inactive for 30 days. Should be looking at archiving and things like that. How are my users getting access, right? So we got 33% of accounts in this demo here that don't have MFA. Right. Yeah. We have 3 admin roles with no MFA, right? Like that's probably a problem. We've got 461 shadow IT apps. What are those? Who's using them? What are they? Right. So it's all this sort of stuff and bringing it together. And we talked about third party, right? And so you want to be able to also look and say, like, what third parties are we using? And, when do those things expire, and how much monetary value is still left in them to see if, even if we wanted to move out of McAfee and go to Defender, does it make sense, right? Or do we still have contract values left in that? And then, like, one of the key things is, and this is where this starts to come together, is what are we trying to do? So this is a little bit of an eye chart, but if I go down here and start to look at security or identity and access management, for instance, what do we want to do, right? So if we just want to do, I don't know, advanced security reports, I can, this will tell me what it is, but I can see here at a glance what licenses it's in. And I also tell if we have them. So you can see here, we have 87 assigned, 69 have adopted. So we're 79% adopted on whatever that was, advanced security reporting, right? So this gives me the ability to go in and start to look at what are we doing and what do we want to do. And so I have the ability to go in here and do some planning that says, I want to do conditional access. So what does that look like for me, right? It's in these licenses. Do I have it today? Don't I have it today? And do some planning around that. So then I can figure out what my ROI is, but also look at, how are we from a security perspective, but figure out when it makes sense to buy, what replacements I can do, how can I do that? How can I save money once all this is sort of filled out? So we take that security posture stuff, and then we turn it into actionable information. We turn it into the right licenses to drive saving. And I know this is a real quick overview, but that's how this stuff starts to come together. And so what we offer with our partner Solilan is an assessment around your security posture, utilizing SLIM. So we can come in, connect to SLIM, start using it to show you some of the stuff that we've been talking about here today, give you a security report that can help either justify what you're buying, look at when to do third-party displacement, when to buy, right? Like, we got a client that's going to move to Microsoft, but they got 2 years left and they can't get Microsoft to, give them pricing that makes sense for them to walk away from the 2 years that they're committed to a couple of other vendors. And so, like, well, Microsoft, we can't do anything for 2 years. And they go to them, they show them, they have all the justification there. And so now they're not double buying and all of that sort of stuff. So I just wanted to summarize there. I don't know, Rija, if there's anything you wanted to mention about that, but that I just wanted to kind of quickly show that. And then, if anybody's got any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat or put up your hand, and we're happy to take a couple of questions.
Well, thank you, Mike, for the opportunity. It was hopefully it made sense to our audience here, and obviously you can reach out to us, to Mike and I, if you have any more questions, if you have any more comments, if there's any you want to do, we can certainly be there as well.
So yeah, so the tooling, Louis, we use it on ourselves at just a couple of dozen employees, and we have it in organizations that are 700,000 employees across. I think our largest is over 700,000. I think there's 780,000 employees across 100 different tenants, and we actually show each of the individual lines of business their own information, and then we do a roll up across those 100 tenants. So it is scalable to the largest enterprises. To set it up itself, it's about 15 minutes. It's read-only access through the O365 graph. We need about 48 hours to start collecting the information and then publishing the reports that we're sharing here. Now, some things we can do right away, because when we go into the Graph API, we're able to get historic information. Other things we need some time in order to start to see. So when it comes to reporting with Microsoft, the core services Microsoft gives you reporting visibility into. So what I mean is Exchange, SharePoint, Teams, OneDrive, Office. You can get out of the portal reporting on that. Other things they do not offer reporting around. So for instance, if you want to go and look at Power BI usage, your usage of Power BI inside of the O365 portal itself is going to be tied to, did they send an email, basically. So it'll show, yep, they're using Power BI because they sent an email, not because they're using Power BI. So the products that Microsoft doesn't do that we've developed, kind of algorithms and logic to go and look at the data that we are able to gather. We need time to collect that. So usually 30 days. So for instance, if I connected to a client and got on and, next week, they had 100 Power BI licenses, we might see 2 have used, because only 2 people use Power BI over the weekend. But 30 days from now, we'll see that, 85 of their 100 users are using it, 15 aren't or whatnot. So it depends a little bit on what we're trying to do. Typically, we like to be connected for 30 days before we really start to make decisions.
I also meant to add up that
You're welcome.
That the assessment is done through all of your cloud assets, but also I know for a fact, because Mike and his team has helped one of my customers, they also can do an assessment based on what you have on premise, which is also a big source of savings, specifically as you prepare yourself to negotiate with Microsoft. If you do have a lot of SQL databases, if you do have a lot of legacy product that you wonder whether you need to renew or not, Mike and his team will be able to help you and have a plan on how you can renegotiate these as well into negotiations with Microsoft.
That's a good point. The other thing is we do Azure as well. So you'll see in here we have an Azure module. So the stuff that I've been showing you for O365, we do very similar stuff for Azure. The difference with Azure, obviously, is you're looking for different things. So we're looking for like resources that aren't being used. We're looking for inefficient use of storage and disk. We're looking to see if you're using your Azure hybrid benefits, idle resources, all that sort of stuff, and giving you visibility. Both O365 and Azure, using the Slim tool, we're driving over 20% cost reductions for our clients on average. The lowest that I've seen was 7% reduction. We had one that we actually pulled 52% out of their EA renewal and their Azure spend, just based on how they were wasting money, doing what they were doing. So, all right, excellent. Well, if there's no other questions, if anybody's interested, if anybody's interested in talking about a security assessment, just reach out to myself or to Herb, and we can set something up with Regia and team to talk about how we can do this. Regia, I'm not gonna put words in your mouth. Just correct me if I'm wrong here, but I believe in some cases we can actually get these assessments funded by Microsoft as well, or portions of them, right?
Yeah.
So
that's correct.
So we can get these assessments potentially funded by Microsoft. So we're happy to have that conversation. Thanks for attending. Hopefully this was informative. Louis, look forward to catching up. Talk to everybody. Have a great day.
To everyone. Thanks again, Mike, for having me. Talk soon.
Thanks, bye.